there are cases in which chiropractic can be harmful. And there are also cases when it can be extremely helpful. Chiropractic, I've used it beneficially, and I've also been harmed by chiropractic as well. So we'll get into that story. My name is Dr. Ryan Peebles. I am a physical therapist by profession. I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life to better understanding and learning how to reverse the root causes of chronic lower back pain. I have a personal history of lower back pain of about a decade, in which I have, like I said, many experiences with chiropractic. How can you use chiropractic in the best way for you and potentially avoid, getting caught up in this cycle that some people fall into, where you either become dependent on chiropractic or, like in my case, you can actually get worse if something is being thrusted, a joint or disc in the spine that shouldn't be getting thrusted, shouldn't be getting adjusted. I was about 23 years old. I remember he adjusted my spine and he had a lot of trouble getting it to crack. He was doing this twisting maneuver on my lumbar spine. My back wasn't popping. And so he would go with a harder thrust. And I remember had several unsuccessful attempts, and eventually he was successful with an extremely hard crack. I felt like he was throwing all his body weight into mine. I remember feeling like, wow, that was forceful. I remember feeling for the first time in my life this shifting feeling in my lumbar spine, like this type of feeling every step I took. And I thought, wow, that's really strange. I feel like my spine is loose and it's shifting. That was the spine moving. It was exactly what it felt like. From that point forward, probably 2 to 3 years, I had an instability in my lumbar spine. And so with instability, there's a lot of friction and wear and tear, degeneration, and this is just one case, and I believe this is applicable to many people. So we're going to talk about why this may have happened and if it may be applicable to you. First, if you can just imagine the spine, and you can imagine almost any spinal condition, any diagnosis. So we have herniated disc, bulging disc, stenosis, degenerative disc disease. All of those are in some form related to degeneration, the degeneration of tissues, body tissues. When you are thrusting a joint that's been degenerated, that would be an abrupt movement in that joint. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you have degeneration and the tissues are worn down and potentially a little bit slack, a little bit loose, to treat that with a thrust, with more friction, because that's the cause of the problem in the first place. So what we would actually want to do is the opposite. We want to provide support and stabilize the joint, just like you would if you sprained your ankle or broke your wrist. We want to try and create that brace with our core muscles. If you have degeneration in your spine, then you probably don't want to get an adjustment at that level. So that is the no-no. And it applies to most conditions. If you have a herniated disc, set a boundary and do not allow the chiropractor to manipulate the herniated level of your spine. As much as they might want to, I still, knowing what I know, the education, the experience, I would set a hard boundary on that. Carpenter sees everything as a potential nail, right? That's what they do for a living. And a chiropractor might see everything through the lens of as a potential opportunity to adjust, even if it's an injury. When would it be good to get an adjustment and get manipulation to the joints of the spine? And so these would be the joints that we want to get manipulated, cracked, adjusted, whatever you want to call it, would be the ones that are stiff, the ones that are not moving enough. And those joints typically don't have a lot of degeneration because they don't have a lot of movement and friction and repetitive trauma. They're just stiff. And so it would be usually beneficial to get adjustments in these levels of the spine. Typically, the pattern would be just above the lumbar spine. So if your problem area is, say, L4, L5, L5S1, those are the degenerated levels, most common ones, then you most likely have stiffness in the levels above those hypermobile or unstable levels. The thoracic spine is usually stiff. That's part of the predictable pattern. You don't adjust a degenerating, injured part of the spine. You don't let somebody manipulate or thrust those parts of the spine. You want to get your manipulation, if you go to the chiropractor, to the stiff parts of the spine. I hope that you see the logic in this, but it becomes a little more difficult to implement in real life when you go to a professional, a doctor, and you go to their office, you're in their environment, and they may be wearing a white coat, which is a symbol of, power, to be able to tell them that you don't want a certain treatment that they want to give you. And that's what you have to do, because there are chiropractors that may not follow these principles that I'm talking about. I would say don't touch my lumbar spine, and that's totally okay. Even if they're wearing a white coat, it's okay to be the boss of your body and your temple. So don't adjust my lumbar spine at all, because that's not why I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you to manipulate the stiff joints. And by doing that and getting more movement, more motion in these joints, you're taking pressure off of the lumbar spine to have to move so much. If you know your body well enough, you can guide a chiropractor to treat the areas of your body that are stiff and avoid the areas of your body that have degeneration and potentially could be harmed by a thrust maneuver. My goal would be to prevent something like that from happening to you. Chiropractic is a valuable tool that can be used to help you, and just takes a little bit of education and knowledge about your body to prevent it from potentially harming you. The only rule is don't manipulate, don't thrust a hypermobility or an instability. That's the only rule, and you got to know where those might be. Typically, they're in the areas of degeneration, and usually those areas are surrounded by stiffness. And those are the areas that could be benefited by a thrust or a manipulation. Hit that like button and support the stream, and subscribe if you haven't already.